Ladies and gentlemen, if I could get your attention, please. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry to interrupt your lunch, but it is now time for us to begin our exciting program. Please join me as well in welcoming our webcast viewers. My name is Andrew Graham. I'm president of the Canadian Club of Toronto, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today. Viewers, thank you for joining us. Please know that everyone can visit ai-live.com to access captioning on your device today. This is the first day we're trying this, and we're excited to see how it works. You can follow along if you're joining us on the webcast or indeed in person and see the instantaneous captioning. Though the world and the Canadian Club may be increasingly powered by AI, some things don't change, like the value of getting together over lunch and hearing a compelling speaker talk about an important topic. And I think today's speaker is a great example in that Canadian Club tradition. Before we get to introducing the speaker, I'd like to thank some of the organizations that have made today possible. First of all, the Carpenters District Council of Ontario, represented by Sean Blake, and RBC, represented by Sasun Darwish. Thank you both very much. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. With us today is one of North America's most experienced city builders. Dan Doctoroff is the chairman and CEO of Sidewalk Labs and has spent the past year and a half working on a master innovation and development plan for Toronto's eastern waterfront. Once complete, it will, we hope, create a new model for innovative and inclusive cities that will be the envy of the world. Before Sidewalk Labs, Dan was president and chief executive officer of Bloomberg LP, the leading provider of news and information to the global financial community. Before that, he served as deputy mayor for economic development and rebuilding for the city of New York. He played a major role in rebuilding of the city after the devastating effects of 9/11. He brought a 5-borough economic development strategy to his role, including the most ambitious land use transformation in the city's history. And I know we saw the opening of the shed last week. Maybe we'll hear more about that. That's a huge accomplishment. I also heard some information about an earlier stage in Mr. Doctoroff's life. He grew up in Detroit, listening to CBC radio, I'm told. And as you can tell from his CV, as I've gone through it, he's someone of great accomplishment that's been good at many things. Apparently, though, at age 11, playing hockey maybe wasn't quite at the top of your list of skills. At age 11, he came across for a hockey tournament in Guelph, Ontario, and lost 9-0. After 2 periods. Wow, I don't know what happened. Did they just cancel the game at that point? So in an otherwise long career of accomplishment, that's an interesting story. Maybe you'll tell us more about that as well. Daniel will deliver some brief remarks, and then he'll be joined on stage by Amanda Lang, BNN Bloomberg anchor. The best-selling author and veteran journalist has more than 20 years of experience covering North American business news. And we're also lucky to count Amanda as a past director of the Canadian Club of Toronto. No doubt she'll have some important questions for our guest, and as I mentioned, you can pose your own questions, and we'll have those passed to Amanda by filling out the Q&A cards on the table. Dan and Amanda, I'm pleased to pass the Canadian Club of Toronto's podium over to you.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and it is so great to be here among actually many friends. It's been, oh, there goes my clicker, but it's been a wonderful 18 months getting to know people, and I'm really thrilled to be here. My hope is that after spending a day or two a week here, hopefully for many, many years to come, I will become an official Canadian. I will never be a great hockey player, by the way. I do have to say, by the way, I will never forget we drove 4 hours to Guelph, played for 2 periods, they called the game, we drove immediately back 4 more hours, and that was probably the highlight of my hockey career. I do also want to acknowledge my friend, Deputy Mayor Michael Thompson. You know, the club of deputy mayors around the world, we're a very tight-knit bunch, and it's really an honor that you are here today, and thank you so much. many of you probably know the history of the Eastern waterfront. This is actually one of my favorite images. Okay, this is from 1910, and this was the plan, or the plans or the vision to fill in them before the marshland was filled in, and before those plans were finalized. Incredible optimism actually prevailed. The Eastern waterfront was going to be the home of Toronto's expanded industrial base. Needless to say, it never happened. By the time the infill was done, the Depression had set in, then World War II, then after World War II, Toronto, like other northeastern North American cities, the manufacturing base began to decline. And as a result, the ground basically lay fallow. Now, 30 years ago, Toronto, like New York, bid for the Olympics. And the leaders of that bid and the leaders of the city at the time had a great idea. The great idea was that place a bunch of the venues for the proposed Olympic bid on the waterfront, build plans around them. When you shine the Olympic spotlight, it acts as a catalyst to getting things done. Needless to say, the Olympics did not happen here, and those plans were not fulfilled. Toronto bid again, the first time for 1996, the second for 2008, and like New York, wasn't successful. But out of that second bid, Waterfront Toronto was born and was given the responsibility for developing 2,000 acres of underutilized land. Much has been accomplished, but has also largely been driven by market forces, yielding condos that, for the most part, are unaffordable to most Torontonians. With less than half of the land left, Waterfront Toronto stepped back and said, is there a different way? Is there a better way? Especially today, leveraging the capabilities that 21st century digital tools can offer to achieve 4 key goals. First, can we achieve a new standard of housing affordability? Second, can we create the world's first climate-positive community? Third, can we actually develop new approaches to addressing the incredible mobility challenges that Toronto and virtually every other successful city in the world are actually facing? And finally, can we actually help to catalyze inclusive job creation? They did something really unusual, and I think incredibly bold for a governmental agency. They went out and canvassed the world. They talked to companies, they talked to developers, I think 52 different ones, and shaped a request for proposals, or RFP, for a, quote, innovation and funding partner who could partner with them, okay, to help them and the 3 governments that they represent achieve their goals. To my mind, that is enlightened government at its best. Basically seeing a problem, looking around to see what might be new approaches to addressing it, and then taking action to actually follow through. Sidewalk Labs, which is a subsidiary of Alphabet, or as I like to say modestly, a sister company of Google, we competed and were thrilled to win. Now, I should also point out, unlike another large technology company. We actually did compete in a government RFP, not have cities compete for our attention. To be very clear, though, what did we win? The only thing that we won was the right to help develop a plan. Anything that we ultimately propose has to not only be approved by the Waterfront Toronto Board, but also in relevant parts by the city, the province, and the federal government. But developing a plan is what we've been doing over the course of the last 18 months. Since then, we've consulted with 20,000, literally 20,000 Torontonians in person. I can't imagine that there's ever been a project where there's been quite that much consultation. We've met with hundreds of government officials. And in the coming weeks, we will actually release the Master Innovation and Development Plan. It is going to be extraordinarily comprehensive, going into great detail on the actual land use plan, the technology or innovation agenda, which we basically break down by what we call pillars, and then a novel partnership between government and Sidewalk Labs. As I said, it's extraordinarily comprehensive. I'm probably not supposed to say this, but we think it'll probably end up being about 1,000 pages long. Don't worry, with a great executive summary. Now, that plan has been shaped by literally the tens of thousands of comments we have received. Planning out in the open is not easy. Sometimes, I have to say, it can be kind of painful. But we have listened extraordinarily carefully. And what's most important, despite the robust dialogue around this plan, and I say that as a massive understatement, we believe that that dialogue is incredibly important and virtually always, one way or another, makes our plans better, because they aren't just our plans anymore. What is most important to me, and what I hope people will see when this plan is released, is that we are completely confident that we can, for the first time anywhere, actually achieve those incredibly ambitious objectives of Waterfront Toronto's. No one in the world has ever achieved those combination of things. We believe that it is possible. And we believe that it is possible to do it in a way that reflects Torontonians' aspirations and addresses your concerns. So let me just give some examples of how the consultation process has actually influenced the plan. We heard over and over from the business community that it wants to participate in innovative development. Our role will actually reflect that. Okay? Our role, we will only play the role that is consistent with that title of innovation and funding partner. We will help to develop, okay, the innovation and design standards, working with Waterfront Toronto and the other governments. And then, once, assuming the plan is approved, we'll help to manage it. We will use Alphabet's patient capital to finance hard-to-finance infrastructure where there's no other alternatives. And we will play a role in moving Google's expanded headquarters onto the waterfront as a way of catalyzing economic development and as part of a strategy to create an ecosystem led by Canadian companies and entrepreneurs that we think can become the global hub of urban innovation in the entire world. As this chart says, we will only develop a small percentage of the eastern waterfront, 7%. Only this first site, Quayside, and part of Villiers Island, where we will propose to place the Google headquarters. Only 7%. That is the amount that we think is necessary to prove out many of the innovation aspects of the innovation agenda so that the rest of it can be developed by local developers, but hopefully consistent with the innovation guidelines that we have proved out. We are also prepared to have partners even for that 7%, local partners for that 7%. Again, all we want to do is enough to prove out the hypotheses. We have heard that you can't have extensive development without addressing the traffic. Not particularly brilliant, everybody knows that. Now, while we believe in a future with AVs, where they play an increasingly important role, and we have designed the streets, actually for the first time ever, to accommodate them, we know that that transition will have to be gradual. That mass transit is the key. We've also heard, though, that there is no money for an LRT extension over into the eastern waterfront. There's simply too many other transit priorities where there are existing political constituencies, and so the LRT to the waterfront has been an unrealized dream. We believe that the LRT itself actually can be the connective tissue that connects the core downtown and East Harbor and brings the eastern waterfront alive, but somehow, some way, it's gonna have to be financeable. We will propose that we can play a role in making that happen. We don't want to have to do that, but in our role as catalyst, using the patient capital that Alphabet provides, we think we can help ensure that that financing of the LRT extension can actually happen. That's what a catalyst does. Steps in to do things that it might have the ability to do when otherwise it might otherwise be difficult. And we believe that at the end of the day, the revenues that are generated from the new development that occur in this area, in part as a result of the LRT extension, can actually help to pay for it. We've received incredible feedback on the physical plans from the public and public officials. One initial idea we had was to extend Queens Quay as a series of bridges over Parliament Slip. We heard, though, that that might make the waterfront feel more disconnected. So we worked with the city and Waterfront Toronto to develop an entirely new design, a design that better connects this area with the surrounding area, that provides better access to the lake, better public space, and better transit access. We've been very focused on making Quayside accessible, informed by 200 members of the accessibility community who have engaged with us in workshops, in events, and in co-designing sessions. One of the great ideas, and this is just a small but important example how working with the communities, affected communities, makes your plans better. One of the great ideas we have as part of our redesigned streets is to develop a set of hexagonal pavers that are actually, they can melt the snow, they can actually have lights embedded in them so that the traffic can be adjusted in real time. Basically part of the strategy for making our streets dramatically more adaptable, more usable more of the time. But working with the accessibility community, we understood that the pavers were of a size that actually would make getting around in a wheelchair more difficult. So what did we do? We changed it. That's the level of detail that we are actually getting into. We also heard, by the way, that this can't just be about the waterfront, that when you talk about economic opportunity, you have to think beyond the core downtown and the waterfront. You have to think to the rest of Toronto. You have to think about Ontario, and by the way, think about Canada more broadly. That's part of the reason that we have focused so intensively on mass timber, creating all of the buildings here out of this basically new material, cross-laminated timber. That would be the structural aspects of buildings. Now, not only does cross-laminated timber or mass timber have enormous environmental benefits, not only do we think that it can lead to cost savings of 20% or more, which can be part of an ambitious affordable housing strategy where we think 40% of the units on the waterfront can be below market rate. Not only do we think it adds aesthetic benefits, but most importantly, we think we can create here in Ontario an industry that is a globally successful industry around mass timber, starting with the forests, the entire supply chain from the forest to the mills, to the truckers, to a new factory actually created somewhere in this area to actually work with the carpenters. We've been working with all of them, and we think just from this site alone, we can produce thousands and thousands of jobs. Finally, we've heard a lot about privacy and data. We all know that collection of data, urban data we call it, from public spaces or semi-public spaces is an issue that is around us. It's the Wild West out there. We don't believe that's correct. We believe that urban data is actually a public asset that needs to be controlled by the public and its representatives. The only way to manage this data is through a democratic process. So we have actually proposed a completely different, candidly, never done before regime that vests control of that data in an independent, government-overseen civic data trust. We are not looking for any special approvals or rights in this place. We think we, like anyone else who wants to use urban data, needs to have it to be done, the agreement to do it in a democratic manner. These are just some of the many ideas, and hopefully Amanda and I will have an opportunity to talk more and then answer your questions, of ways in which our plans have been informed by this incredibly robust dialogue. As I said, once we submit the plan, it's not over. Then we have to go get the approvals from all of the different levels of government, including Waterfront Toronto. What is important at the end of the day, and we recognize this with all humility, is this can't be our plan. This has to be a plan by Torontonians, for Torontonians. But one thing I do know is that if we can work together, we have an opportunity to show the world that there's actually a new model, that we can accommodate growth and move people around, that we can find ways to house people in areas that increasingly they are getting priced out of, that we can set a new global standard for environmental stewardship, and that what we can do is produce jobs centered on a global hub of urban innovation, but way beyond that, for people at all income levels. And we can do all those things here on the waterfront working together. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion with Amanda.
Thanks, Dan. That was great. Do we seem ungrateful to you? The people of Toronto? No.
No, you know, it's funny. People ask me that all the time. And, you know, having spent 6 years trying to redevelop areas of New York in the period right after 9/11, I learned one thing, and that is that these processes, I guess, of working through all these very difficult issues inevitably do make the plans better. And so I said, sometimes this can be really painful, but you know, if you listen and if you're prepared to, you know, basically adjust where appropriate, it's actually pretty gratifying.
So one of the questions I think that underpins a lot of people's curiosity on the whole spectrum of positive to negative about the project is why Alphabet wants to do it, what the interest is, right? And that's where you get the kind of fear and suspicion about the underlying motives. Why did Alphabet want to do this?
Well, I think an equally good question is why would I
you?
want to do this? You know, it's like, you know, I'm 60 years old. I've been fortunate. I don't need to do this. I think Alphabet and I are exactly the same. In fact, Larry Page and I, Larry is one of the two co-founders of Google, now CEO of Alphabet, kind of share this view. We believe that we are at a unique moment in time. Literally, this is one of these once-in-a-100-year moments when there's a set of technologies or innovations that can be deployed to fundamentally bend the curve on quality of life in our urban environments. We probably had 3 of them in the last 200 years before this. And, you know, we think that there's an incredible opportunity to do that. And I know people don't believe us when we say that, and people are very suspicious, and I get that. But our main motive, and I will tell you the motive of every single one of the people at Sidewalk Labs, main motive of every one of the people at Sidewalk Labs, is because we believe we can make urban life better in the 21st century. Now, you know, look, we are a subsidiary of a public company. We're not a not-for-profit. We've always believed that if we can figure out the way to bend that curve on those quality of life measures, we'd find a way to make money. And you know, as we lay out the plans over the next couple in the spring here, I think it'll be quite transparent. To be clear, though, just to anticipate your question, there's really you know, there's 3 basic ways that we expect to make money. One is the real estate development that we said we expect to make money. We will overinvest in Quayside and hope to make some of that back over time. Second is if people want us to finance some of that infrastructure, said we don't need to. We think it might be necessary in order to unlock the value. We expect to earn a reasonable return on that, not dramatic, but reasonable. And then third, there'll be a handful of products that we create for this place that we hope will have value somewhere else, and we can create businesses around them.
You described the 3 volumes of the development plan.
Right.
The first volume is coming in the spring.
The whole thing's coming
All
in the
3
spring.
of them.
All 3 is coming in
okay.
the spring.
How much do you expect those to change, your plans to change, once Waterfront gets a look at it?
Well, I think a lot of what will be in there has been out in the public already. But this will be the first time that everybody sees everything all together and how it all fits together. I expect there'll be a fair amount of negotiation over lots of different aspects of the plan, both, as we've already engaged a lot on the physical planning with the city and Waterfront Toronto. Still inevitably there'll be discussions about that and how much technology do you actually want to deploy. So what should we be committed to actually deploying? And then lastly, in terms of the actual deal with government. So, we are not the kind of people, in part because we have served in government, we understand that the process is a give and take, who say, oh, here it is, take it or leave it. We expect that at the end of the day, this has got to be something that wins public and public sector approval. We're hopeful that we'll be able to do that, and we'll be flexible enough, without compromising the basic idea here, which is, can we combine cutting-edge innovation with great urban design to produce a place that actually improves people's lives in a material way and shows that way to the rest of the world?
Are there issues about which you would walk away? In other words, are there elements of this plan that if you can't have them, you do not want to do that?
I don't want to get into that now. I think, we're not negotiating anything in advance. But
you could walk away, though, theoretically.
And by the way, government could turn us down. And when we entered into this deal originally, we agreed to spend $50 million of our own money to develop the plan. And it's going to be completely public. Government could turn us down. And, that's the risk that we took. So I'm hoping that certainly won't happen. I think there's an incredible amount for people to love here. But we also recognize that this is new. There's a lot of new stuff. Most people don't, accept change immediately. Myself, by the way, I joke all the time. My staff, a number of whom, are here, will joke that I have a 4-part response to any new idea. The first is instantaneous rejection. The second is near immediate reconsideration. The third is acceptance of the idea. And fourth is it became my idea. So, I get that people take time to understand new concepts. And our job is to try as effectively as we possibly can to convey the power of the ideas here.
People will know that you were the driving force behind the redevelopment of Hudson Yards in New York. A big piece of that was an extension of the subway.
Yep.
You've made it clear that the transit is important here. I'm not asking you to negotiate in public because I know you don't want to do that. But that feels like a potential deal breaker if that can't happen.
Well, look, I think there is a very strong constituency for extending the LRT. I don't think there's any real debate over the fact that it's important to extend the LRT. If you want greater density in that area, and having greater density is critical to actually providing that relief valve, particularly downtown, for the incredible housing pressures that actually exist, most importantly. So I don't think there's a whole lot of debate. The question is, can we find a way to make it happen? So the New York story is very similar to the waterfront over here. It's an area on the west side of New York called Hudson Yards that for literally the same 100 years, people have been trying to find a way to redevelop and turn it into something that it had been dominated by rail yards and vacant lots and parking lots, literally in Manhattan. And for 100 years, people couldn't figure it out. And so what we did was, we said the key to it is extending the subway into the area. And there was no money. The city had no money at all. This was right after 9/11. So we actually created a financing vehicle to be able to do that. That financing vehicle, by the way, where the city literally put in $258 million, is going to produce to the city even after the debt service, $20 billion of free cash flow back to the city. So we think there are mechanisms that can work. Said we don't have to be the ones to do it. We said we prefer not to be perfectly honest, but we're prepared to step in with a creative approach that said uses our parents' patient capital to make that happen.
Were you surprised? I mean, it must have, because you did such an intense consultation, public consultation process, it must have come up early and often. But were you surprised that the data privacy issue got the airtime that it does? It still is the biggest issue people consider.
You know, I can't say I was surprised. We always viewed that as a foundational issue. And we knew that we were going to have to come up with a completely new approach to it. I think what surprised me a little bit was that nobody was prepared to give us sort of the benefit of the doubt. You know, we were just in the process of developing a plan. We were consulting with people. I was surprised it got quite heated quite quickly. While we were saying we were just listening to people and developing a plan. But that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I think it was constructive, certainly overwhelmingly constructive. And I think it led us to think probably even more deeply about some of the issues. And I do feel that kind of what we have proposed, and again, it's just a proposal. You know, at the end of the day, it's something that government actually has to adopt or create its own regime. We're not wed to any one particular approach, but we all know that if we're going to have in the 21st century where there are cameras and sensors everywhere, and in the world, there's a great article in the New York Times today, for example, about a Times, I think, reporter for $60 put a camera in Bryant Park in New York and got cheap computer vision technology and could literally identify, individuals walking through the park. There are in New York or in Toronto, nowhere, any limitations on anybody's ability to do that. We're saying in this place, under what we have suggested, that can't happen. That it all has to be pursuant to this independent civic data trust which has oversight for it. So we're talking about going dramatically beyond what anyone else has actually done, because we think that's the right thing to do, and we think that can set an example for the rest of the world. Already from around the world, we're getting really positive feedback to the idea. You know, we've talked to obviously did this after consulting with privacy regulators here in Ontario and in Ottawa, and said just an idea, but you know, I think the controversy about it probably pushed us to think even more deeply about it.
Just a short while ago, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association issued a release saying that they're suing Sidewalk to stop the whole process, to undo the deal. Your right to develop a plan, I guess. And the word that they use in the release is surveillance, which is that's the big brother word that we all worry about. Although frankly, Google already knows everything about us anyway. So it's sort of a funny. You might actually make us safer than we are right now.
Well,
to your point.
You know, as I said, first of all, you know, we have nothing to do, believe it or not, with Google, right? So we share, you know, we don't share any data. We said right from the very beginning that we weren't going to commercialize any data, no advertising for data, only use it pursuant to this civic data trust and approvals. But I do believe that you know, the approach that we've suggested, said there may be other approaches, will set a new standard globally, that there shouldn't be any use of kind of surveillance that is not ultimately approved by sort of this government run or authorized entity. And that's true for us or others as well. So I haven't seen the lawsuit, but I think it is really important that we get this right. But this is not just an issue here. This is an issue that we are, all confronting every day in our lives, and we think it's really important to take a different approach.
And definitely has raised the issue in everybody's minds. So it's now a public policy issue that we're debating, which is a very good thing. As you go down the path, I know you can't really give me timelines, but I'd like timelines. Okay. Anyway, the Waterfront Toronto gets it.
Bloomberg reporters, by the way, are the best in the world.
I think you said you were going to deliver it May 1st. Is that what you said?
No, we didn't say that. We said
That's
that
spring. I mean, after May, it's really summer.
In the spring.
Okay.
It's over the next several weeks.
And then how long do they have with it? What do you envision in terms of back and forth before? How long before we have a wooden building on Quayside?
I think realistically, the earliest you could have the first building on Quayside would be toward the end of 2023, maybe.
So we're a ways off.
We're a ways off, and look, I think that's an indication that we're really in this for the long term, by the time that rolls around, I'll not just be 60, I'll be 65. And no, we believe in this, and we believe that, in order to be successful, we have to kind of stick it out through all sorts of ups and downs. And that is just what it takes in these types of very complicated public-private partnerships. You mentioned Hudson Yards in New York. I came up with that idea for Hudson Yards before I was in government, when I was leading that failed Olympic bid in 1996. It just opened up in 2019, so it's 23 years later. I led the effort to create the Shed, New York's newest cultural institution, which came out of the plan for Hudson Yards, and we've been working on it for 14 years. So, the last thing we are people who kind of duck in and duck out. When we commit to something, and we're in it for the long term.
In New York, you kind of reclaimed the High Line. To great effect, I can say, as a frequent visitor of New York. That was exported. Other cities then did the same thing. In this project, are there things that you expect to be exported? I mean, is the idea here that you're doing it here because we have this great opportunity of the land sitting there? Do you expect it to go around the world?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the really powerful ideas here. And I should also say, most of the stuff that will happen on this waterfront will not be our ideas. What we hope to create is an open platform for innovation that others, particularly local entrepreneurs and local companies, can build on top of. We see this, playing this catalytic role, but this being a magnet for people to come and develop ideas where essentially, they'll be able to think about the urban environment in a very kind of integrated way. And so whether it's our ideas or others, I think one of the great things about this is that people around the world are looking at it, right? And one of the things you realize about cities, it's true about companies too, but cities is they copy others, I think, just aggressively. I'll never forget when we opened up the High Line in 2008, within a year, there were 36 High Lines under development around the world, basically built on rail lines. But what was more interesting to me is the next generation were things that took some of the lessons from the High Line and adjusted them to their own unique local conditions. So the Bentway here, in some ways, is almost like a grandchild of the High Line. Took the lessons about adaptive reuse, public-private funding, and operation, the people who actually lead Friends of the High Line, which is the private group that worked with government to save and now manage the High Line, actually consulted with the Bentway. And I think there'll be literally hundreds of things that people look to here for inspiration and adapt in their own way. It's also why I believe if we can be successful here, we truly can create in Toronto as this place that everyone is looking to set the standard as that global hub of innovation. Companies are going to want to be here. Local entrepreneurs are going to have that first mover advantage to try things out in this unique laboratory.
You talked about this, so you're 7%. Other developers will develop elsewhere, but on the plan so that the innovation themes stay the same. How big ultimately a piece of land development are we talking about here?
Well, the entire area that's defined as the eastern waterfront is about 340 hectares altogether. So it's huge. I mean, it's really big. Now, that's not to say all of it will ultimately be developable. And by the way, we don't believe that the types of the innovation agenda should be extended to other parts of it until we've been able to prove to people, both government and the private sector, that the ideas actually make sense for them. So taking a very phased approach to this, we think, is the prudent thing to do. That was another piece of feedback that we got, I think, over and over again, and we believe it's absolutely the right thing to do. But you could have on that waterfront over time, almost 100,000 people living there. That we will do a tiny piece of it, but I think that is really important. And the key thing is, how do you get it started in a place where for 107 years it has stubbornly resisted kind of development?
We need to leave it there. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Doctoroff.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to both of you for that really terrific discussion. This is certainly one of the most followed and I think most anticipated exercises in urban development that this city has experienced in a long, long time. And I think there's a lot of excitement to see the plan when it comes out, not on May 1st, but in the next few weeks, we heard. And I thank you for giving us some of the highlights and a preview of that today, Mr. Doctoroff, and thank you for bringing your expertise and your long history and successful history in urban development to this project. Amanda, thank you very much for hosting a really terrific discussion. You always do a great job at it, and thank you for being back at the club today. If I could just ask for a round of applause for both Amanda and Dan. Just before we conclude the event, let me tell you about some upcoming events that we have. First of all, tomorrow, which is Wednesday, April 17th, we have Andrea Horvath, leader of the official opposition. She's leader of the Ontario New Democrats, and she's going to address the club. And then on April 30th, we're going to host a dynamic panel that's going to discuss the lived experiences of ethnic minorities on Bay Street working in corporate Canada. That's called Being Brown Downtown. I think that's going to be a really exciting discussion. Just before we conclude, I'd like to extend another round of thanks to today's event sponsors, the Carpenters District Council of Ontario and RBC. Thank you once again. And finally, thanks to MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming today's event. That concludes our event today. I hope the rest of your afternoon goes well. Thank you.